One of the questions I get asked pretty consistently is some version of, do I need to redo my whole website or do I just need to update some things? It sounds like a simple question, but getting it wrong costs you something real in either direction. If you do a full redesign when a refresh would have done the job, you've spent more money and more time than you needed to. And the new site probably won't perform meaningfully better than the old one would have with some targeted updates. If you do a refresh when the site actually needs a real rethink, you've put new paint on a structural problem. And in 6 months, you'll be back looking at a site that's slightly better looking, but still not working the way it should. The frustrating part is that from inside your own site, this isn't always obvious. The site isn't doing what you want it to do. That's clear. What's less clear is why. And the nature of the problem, whether it's on the surface or in the structure, determines everything about what actually fixes it. That's what I want to get into today. There are two categories that every website problem falls into, and I think about them as surface and structure. Surface problems are about content and presentation. The copy doesn't reflect where you are now. The photos are outdated. The design has inconsistencies that make it feel unpolished. The call to action is weak or hard to find. These are real problems. They affect how the site performs. But they're fixable within the existing architecture of the site. You don't have to rebuild anything. You have to update and improve what's there. Structural problems are different. They're about the fundamental organization of the site, what the pages are built around, how they're ordered, what the navigation assumes about the visitor's path. A structural problem can't be fixed by updating the content. You can refresh the copy and swap the photos and the problem is still there because the problem isn't what the site says. It's how the site is built. Getting the diagnosis right is essentially the whole decision. Today, we're going to go through what each category looks like, the signals that indicate which one you're dealing with, the mistakes that happen on both sides, and a middle option most advisors don't think about, and how to actually make the call on your own site. Let me describe an advisor who got this diagnosis wrong, not through carelessness, just because it's a genuinely hard thing to see from inside your own site. She specializes in New Zealand and the South Pacific, Fiji, the Cook Islands, New Zealand proper, that whole part of the world. She's been doing it seriously for a few years now, has real depth in those destinations, and her referral network within that specialty is strong. Clients refer other clients specifically because she knows that region well. The site, though, was built back when she was still a generalist. She'd built it at the beginning when the business was newer and the specialty hadn't fully formed yet. Over the years since, she'd refreshed it twice. First time, new photos, some updated copy, cleaned up a few of the design things that had been bothering her. Second time, new specialty page for New Zealand, more current testimonials, a better call to action on the homepage. Each time the site looked better. Each time it still didn't feel right. She'd look at it and something was off in a way she couldn't quite locate. She was about to do a third refresh when someone she trusted looked at the site and said something that shifted how she was thinking about it. It looks like a generalist site that has some New Zealand photos on it, which was accurate. The homepage was organized around the idea that she could help with any trip. The navigation had a destination section with several different regions listed. The About page talked about her love of travel broadly before mentioning the South Pacific specialty. The structure of the site, the bones of it, was built for a version of her business that didn't really exist anymore. The copy changes and the new photos from the two refreshes had both landed on top of a structure that was wrong. The refreshes made the surface look better, but the surface wasn't the problem. The problem was that the site was still organized around being a generalist, and no amount of content updates was going to change that. That's the difference between a surface problem and a structural one. And understanding which you have is the thing that determines what you actually need to do. Surface problems are usually visible the moment you look at your site with some objectivity. The copy doesn't accurately describe what you do or who you help right now. It was true when you wrote it, but the business has evolved. The photography is dated or too generic, or clearly stock in a way that doesn't communicate anything real about your specialty. There are design inconsistencies, fonts not matching across pages, spacing that's uneven, a color palette that's grown by accident over time. Sometimes the surface problem is about missing elements rather than wrong ones. The call to action is vague or buried. There's no scheduler, just a contact form. A specialty page you should have doesn't exist yet. A lead magnet would make sense and isn't there. The defining characteristic of a surface problem is that the underlying structure of the site is basically sound. The homepage is organized in a logical way. The navigation makes sense. The flow from landing to understanding who you are to taking action is reasonable. If you fix the content and the presentation, the site would work. That's the test. Strip away the current copy and photos and imagine them replaced with something better. Does the site work then? If yes, the structure would hold up with better content in it. That's a surface problem. Structural problems are harder to see from inside the site, which is part of why people often miss them. The most common one is when the positioning has fundamentally shifted and the site hasn't followed. This is exactly what happened with the New Zealand advisor. She had moved from generalist to specialist, but the site was still organized around being a generalist. The homepage assumed the visitor needed to understand a range of what she offered. The navigation assumed she was going to help with a variety of destinations. None of that was accurate anymore. But you couldn't fix it by updating the copy alone, because the copy was the symptom and the structure was the cause. Another structural problem is when the homepage flow is wrong in a way that requires rethinking the page rather than rewriting it. The order of what a visitor encounters matters. If someone lands on a homepage and the first thing they're asked to do is understand your service offerings before they've been given any reason to trust you, that's a sequencing problem. And you can't solve a sequencing problem by changing the words in each section. Confusing navigation is a structural problem when it's genuinely confused at the level of what's in it and how it's organized, not just crowded. A navigation that has the wrong items or that doesn't reflect how visitors actually move through a site needs to be rethought rather than just cleaned up. And there are structural problems that aren't about organization at all. They're about the platform. If your platform makes it hard to do things you need to do, like add a scheduler or update pages without it being a significant undertaking, or if the site loads slowly or doesn't work well on mobile in ways that are inherent to the platform rather than fixable within it, those are structural problems that require a platform change. This is the more expensive of the two mistakes, and it's more common. What usually happens is that an advisor refreshes a site with structural problems and the site improves somewhat. The new photos make it look more current, the updated copy is more accurate, but it still doesn't perform the way it should. So they refresh again, and again it's better, and again it still isn't working right. And after 2 or 3 rounds of refreshing, they've spent a meaningful amount of time and sometimes money on a site that still has the original problem, just with better looking content sitting on top of it. The accumulation of those repeated refreshes is the cost. In aggregate, they often approach what an actual structural fix would have cost, except you still don't have a site that's working well. The signal that you're in this pattern is when you refresh and the improvement feels smaller than it should. You updated what seemed like the main problems and the site is better, but not right. That gap between better and right is often structural. The opposite mistake is less common but more visible when it happens, because the effort and cost are hard to miss. An advisor has a site with surface problems, the photos are outdated, the copy is generic, the design has accumulated some inconsistencies. She decides it's time for a new website. She goes through the whole process, new template or the new design, rebuild everything, launch. The new site looks good. The design is cleaner. The photos are fresh. And a few months in, she's wondering why it isn't performing noticeably better than the old one. The reason is that the problems were surface problems, copy and photography and design polish, and the redesign didn't fundamentally change those things. The copy got rewritten during the redesign, but went through the same process as before and landed in roughly the same place. The photos were sourced the same way. The positioning is described in basically the same terms in a different visual wrapper. A redesign doesn't automatically produce better messaging. It doesn't automatically sharpen your positioning or improve how you're communicating who you help and what you know. Those are content decisions that happen before or during design, not as a result of it. If the content decisions stay the same, the results stay the same. There's an option between a full refresh and a full redesign that most advisors don't think about, and I want to name it because I think it's often the right answer. It's a targeted rebuild, redesigning the specific pages with structural problems while refreshing the rest. The home page is wrong structurally, the specialty pages are fine with updated content. Rebuild the home page, refresh the specialty pages. The navigation needs a fundamental rethink. The individual pages are okay. Fix the navigation and leave the pages alone. You're focusing the redesign effort on the parts that actually need it instead of treating everything as equally broken. This is often faster and cheaper than a full redesign, and more effective than a surface refresh, precisely because it matches the scope of the work to the actual scope of the problem. The advisor with the New Zealand site didn't necessarily need to rebuild every page. She needed to rebuild the home page, rethink the navigation, and update the About page to lead with a specialty. The specialty pages she'd built were fine. A targeted rebuild there was the right scope. There are 3 questions I'd walk through when trying to make this call on your own site. The first, if I updated the copy and the photos and cleaned up the design inconsistencies, would this site work? Not just would it look better, would it do the job? Would the structure, with better content in it, communicate the right thing to the right person and give them a clear path to take action? If the answer is yes, that's a surface problem. The second, has my positioning fundamentally changed since this site was built? Not evolved slightly, but actually shifted. Different type of client, different specialty, different kind of travel. If the answer is yes, the site structure may be built around a version of the business that doesn't even exist anymore, and content updates alone won't fix that. The third, is the platform capable of doing what I need, and can I actually maintain it without it being so difficult that I just don't? If the platform is actively limiting what the site can do or so cumbersome to use that the site doesn't get updated, the platform is a structural problem. The 3 questions are the framework, but it can help to do something more concrete with them. Actually sit down and walk through your site as a stranger would, trying to notice what you'd feel rather than what you know. The thing that usually trips advisors up when they try this is that they know too much. They know what the specialty is, so they don't notice that the homepage doesn't communicate it clearly. They know the About page is a bit vague because they wrote it quickly 3 years ago, so they read past it. They know what the navigation is supposed to do, so they don't notice that a visitor who doesn't know the structure wouldn't necessarily follow it. One way to get around this is to ask someone who doesn't know your business to spend 2 or 3 minutes on your site and then tell you, what do you think this person specializes in? What would you do next if you were interested in working with them? That's not a scientific study, but the answers are often instructive. If someone reads your homepage and comes away thinking you're a generalist, when you're actually a specialist, that's a structural signal. If they come away with the right impression but can't find the scheduler, that's a surface signal. Another useful exercise is to read just the headlines and subheadings on your homepage. Nothing else, just the headlines in sequence. And ask whether the resulting story is coherent. Visitors skim before they read. If the headlines tell a logical, persuasive story on their own, the page is probably well structured. If they don't, if they're disconnected or if they repeat the same point in different words, or if there's no clear through line, that's often a structural problem with how the page is organized, not just a copy problem with the individual headlines. For surface problems, refreshing copy, updating photos, cleaning up design inconsistencies, this is something most advisors can do themselves if they're comfortable in their platform and willing to take the time. It doesn't require design expertise. It requires clear thinking about the content and careful attention to the presentation. Structural problems are harder to solve without outside help. Not because the technical work is always more complex, but because the structural problems are genuinely difficult to see clearly when you're inside the site. The New Zealand advisor didn't realize the site was organized around the wrong thing. It was someone else who saw it and said it plainly. That outside perspective is often what makes it possible to identify the structural problem in the first place, let alone fix it. There's also the time consideration. A full structural rethink, done yourself while running a travel advisory business, can take months. Done with someone who does this regularly is usually faster and the outcome is more reliable. One thing that makes this decision harder than it should be is that a lot of advisors think of their website as a thing you build and then leave alone until it gets bad enough to require a major project. The build was the project, now it sits. The alternative is treating the site as something you maintain regularly with occasional larger investments when something actually warrants it. In that model, the copy gets reviewed every year or so to make sure it still accurately reflects where the business is. Photos get updated when they feel dated. A new specialty page gets added when a new specialty develops. The site doesn't drift far from where it should be because it's not being left alone. Advisors who maintain their sites this way tend to need full redesigns less often because the gap between where the site is and where it should be never gets very large. A refresh can close it. The site that was built and never touched for 4 years is the one that's more likely to have structural problems. Not because the design aged out, but because the business changed and the site didn't follow. The New Zealand advisor eventually did a targeted rebuild. The homepage and navigation rethought from scratch. The specialty pages refreshed with updated content. It took about a month. The site that came out of it looked similar to what was there before in terms of visual design, but it was organized differently. It led with the specialty. The navigation assumed visitors were there for New Zealand and the South Pacific. The homepage made a case for the advisor specifically rather than for travel advisors generally. The difference wasn't that the site looked dramatically different. The difference was that it was organized around the right thing. That's what surface and structure is actually for. Not a vocabulary lesson, but a way of seeing your own site clearly enough to know what it actually needs. Surface problems need better content. Structural problems need a different architecture. And knowing what you have before you do anything is what makes it possible to fix the right thing. I'm Justin Hinkle. If you found this useful, subscribe. New episodes come out regularly, and that's the easiest way not to miss one. This is the Travel Advisor Website Show. Stick around.